Hello, and welcome to Conversations from the Alcove. My name is Caridad Svich. I'm the Artistic Director of the Alcove New Play Development Program at the Lucille Lortel Theater in New York City. Lots of words. Welcome. And if you haven't been to the series before, this is a conversation series that's devoted to playwriting, theater, and the world, not necessarily in that order. And a lot of the focus is on craft, but also on just sometimes the business of playwriting and sometimes just the sheer frustrations and joys of this seemingly impossible craft. I'm going to start with a brief audio description of myself. I am a fair-skinned person with auburnish, goldish, brownish, dark brown hair. Today I'm wearing it to the side. Sometimes I usually wear it up. Today I'm wearing it to the side in a kind of side ponytail. I have fluffy bangs that are on my forehead. I have brown eyes. I have a sort of-ish cat eyeglasses perched on the tip of my nose. I'm wearing red lipstick. I'm wearing stringy blue headphones. And I'm wearing a top. You might see part of it here on the screen, which is a kind of blue-white top. It's got some really cool patterns on it, but I don't think you can catch them. But they're sort of abstract and they're very beautiful. And behind me is just a white background, which is real. It's not a digital background. And today's guests are two guests today. This is an unusual day. It's very exciting for us in Conversations from the Alcove. We have Vickie Ramirez and Drew Woodson. And I'm just going to start with super brief introductions of each, because more importantly, we're here to have a chat about all things theater, or maybe some things theater. Vickie Ramirez is a Tuscarora, Six Nations of the Grand River, based by way of New York City. So we have some New York City connection here. And their work is also in film and television, as well as theater. Their work has been seen in many places around the country. And I think one of the things that I love about Vickie's writing is that it has a kind of wide, empathetic, compassionate lens on character, but also kind of like a wicked sense of humor and a sort of darkness that's kind of in there and that sometimes emerges in quite startling ways. And I'm like, Vickie, how is this possible? This is the magic of playwriting, right? Drew Woodson is a Western Shoshone playwright based also in New York City, and was named Yale's Young Indigenous Playwright of 2021. I want to know all about that. And their work is like, I'm just getting to know Drew's work, and I find what I know of it thus far is ambitious and kind of like wide-ranging and also mysterious. There's a kind of like area of like unresolvedness in Drew's writing, which I'm really attracted to. So I just wanted to lift that up a little bit. I'm sure they can talk more about that. Welcome to both of you. And for those of you that know this series, you know that I always start with the same question. But I first wanted to offer you a chance if you wanted to do audio descriptions of yourself before we begin.
All right. So, Twet Scanahay, Vickie Ramirez Yafe. Hello, I'm Vickie Ramirez, brunette, pretty fair for an Indigenous person, but brunette, dyed, gray roots, black t-shirt, in the family room. I'm actually on the res right now. I'm sort of I split my time between Six Nations and New York City. So I'm in the family room on the res. So greetings from Six Nations, everybody. Big black chair, very cushy, bookshelf over on the side, and another bookshelf behind. Oh, and I'm wearing silver gray glasses.
Drew, if you wish to do an audio description, no pressure, just asking.
Absolutely. So, Nenanaha, my name is Drew Woodson. I'm a member of the Western Shoshone Nation from Nevada, so very far away from where I currently am in New York City. I'm wearing a white shirt and a white top, black hair, also pretty light-skinned for a Native person, so we have that in common. And I'm currently in the NYU building, actually, because I still have access to it for the summer. even though I already graduated. And behind me, there is a weird setup of computers and then a fake ladder that doesn't actually go anywhere, but it's there for decoration.
I love this, and I had no idea. I was like, that reminds me of NYU, but I didn't want to say anything. And then I was like, you totally are there. Okay,
Yes.
awesome. Thank you for doing that and welcoming. I wanted, for those of you that follow the series, I always start with the same question, which has to do with the climate crisis and how is it affecting your art making, your thinking about it, your material ways of thinking about it, as well as philosophical and spiritual ways of thinking about it, in all shapes and forms. Vickie.
Well, it's weird because I think it's an ever-present part of the writing process, and it's an ever-present part of the storytelling itself. I would say it just sort of weaves itself in when I'm writing, especially there are times that I focus on it, but times that I don't. But it's always about the ever-changing, like the land is such a core part of my writing that the climate crisis itself, the way with Pure Native itself, it's it's about bringing a bottled water factory to the reservation, which is absolutely against everything traditional. It's wasting resources, but the folks are under such economic pressure that they're like, I mean, do we adapt? Because, traditions formed as the world formed and they adjusted as the environment adjusted. It's not like this is pretty severe changes that we're going through, but it's not the first time it's happened. So yeah, it's kind of weaves itself in that sort of respect, but it's in everything too. It's in Standoff, it's in Smoke, it's in Burn. It's just sort of weaves itself through everything.
Yeah, I hear you. Drew.
Yeah, I would say also kind of similarly, like it's just always present. I don't think it's something that you can really escape. And it's interesting. I feel like I can see so much of it in so many of my peers' works as well. Like I was just at the Great Plains Theater Conference that was in Nebraska this past year, and it was a wonderful experience. But the majority of the plays had something to do with the climate crisis. There was some aspect of it that had this kind of looming threat that's always just kind of in the back, that's always present in the plays. And I think it's the same for me, where in one of my plays, And From Above, there is this kind of looming danger that's present that this particular community that's in the play has never seen before, and they know it's coming. And it's the same thing in this play that I'm currently writing for the Alcove, for just in general for me as well, titled Smoke, which is about the California wildfires. And it's the same thing where I grew up in Nevada and California, but when I was in California, I was on Pomo land, and my dad worked for the Pomo Reservation. And we never had any trouble with California wildfires before around 2015. And then all of a sudden, there was wildfires every single summer. And it was the worst, the deadliest wildfire in California history every single summer. And so that play is very influenced by that as well, because that is a part of this kind of looming, dangerous threat that's hanging just around the corner. And I think that that's really present in today's generation of playwriting as well.
Yeah, it makes me think about some article I read this week. I'm always reading, but it was sort of fascinating because it was talking about when in California did people start saying it's wildfire season? Do you know what I mean?
Right.
The sort of normalization of catastrophe, and how instead of addressing what may be causing this, instead people are like, oh, I guess it's wildfire season, and we just, I don't know, this is what we do. And I think that, and I have mixed minds about that. One of them being, well, I think that's horrific, but I also think that maybe a natural response, like when people don't know what to do with the enormity of a problem, they kind of try to minimize it, which is also incredibly dangerous, right? But the other part of that is that I think that, oh, wait a minute, that means that it starts to absolve the people that are enacting, that are kind of ravaging the land, that are kind of extracting from it, that are kind of making the land literally uninhabitable for humans and a lot of other living beings, right? That it's kind of absolving them. Well, it's just, it's how people use the word climate change. And I'm going, it didn't just change on its own. Like literally it happened because there's some actions that took place, that have been taking place, that continue to take place, that are making this occur, right? And so that's why I always say crisis or catastrophe or emergency. I feel like that feels more true, and it kind of stops letting people off the hook. Does it affect? So we've talked a little bit about theme and content, I suppose, but I wonder how it affects your, if it does at all, the way you're thinking about, like, literally the shaping of a play, or the materials that you use in which to make it, like little practical stuff, like hands-on practical stuff, if it does at all. Vickie.
I mean, definitely, I think there is, in my brain, I've been starting to think about how do we make the play more organic to whatever space it's supposed to be in, rather than impose settings, impose all these rigid lights, structures, all this. It's because I do firmly think we've, had this discussion with lots of my playwright buddies, in that, the theater as it is right now, in the form that is going on with, subscription-based theaters, et cetera, and Broadway, we're seeing it starting to crumble. So I don't think that means the death of theater, but I do think that because that's nonsense. That's nonsense. As long as people can stand up in a space, theater will exist. That's just how it is. If you can speak, theater will exist. But I think we're all starting to think, how do we make this mutable? How do we make it organic? How do we make it flow? So we can maybe get that model back from, of the traveling theater company, or, just find spaces where we can throw the show up without worrying about all the other constructs that we have to deal with. So that does impact my writing. I try not to, I tend to over describe, I think, sometimes. So I'm trying to reel that in a bit and see how much of it we can just focus on just keeping it a fluid space.
Cool. Drew, similar, different? How are you going about it practically?
Practically very similar. I think what I'm so much more interested in now than when I first started writing is just the language. It's the words, it's the acting, it's the people on stage or people wherever they are. And one of the things when I first started writing, I thought it had to be very structured, and I thought it had to be very, you're describing everything that's happening on the stage. You're describing everything that's happening that needs to be set up, like all these different things. And what I've come to realize just through my style is I'm much more actually interested in just letting the actors kind of work through the dialogue and letting the language kind of just speak for itself, which I think is it's a different kind of style of writing. And I think that also stems from me coming from an acting background as well, is just being very much more interested in that. But also too, like, to speak to Vickie's point, it's so that you can remove all the kind of bells and whistles that sometimes go along with theater and with like making a show, and just bringing it right back down to like what's important, what are we focusing on in this play, why are we even doing this play, why are we writing this play in the first place, just dragging it back down to those kind of base roots.
Yeah, the roots. It's so funny because I was thinking about a playwriting student that I had this past semester. No shade to them, but it was sort of interesting because we were occasionally see shows, or kind of talk about them, there was one show that they saw that was very minimal, like in its elements, in terms of lighting, and actually had amazing lighting, but it was still very minimal, and there was very little kind of ostensible set, even though there was a set. And they got very angry. They were livid. They were like, "Where's I don't understand. Like, I had to it was just the actors, and they were speaking, and where's all the stuff? They missed all the stuff." They were sort of like, and they felt like it wasn't a choice. It was sort of fascinating. They were like, why didn't they put more stuff on stage? And like, I'm supposed to be looking at something. And I was like, my gosh, just looking at performers is kind of like an amazing thing. And like looking at another human being or a robot or an animal or whatever's on stage, whatever's being kind of standing there in that space is magical, right? And so it was sort of an interesting thing, because I was wrestling with this idea of like what expectations even fellow practitioners come with into a theater space. And I wonder, I wanted to sort of open up the question to this around structure. You mentioned structure, Drew, so I want to lift that up to say, like, how does this affect like how you think about either inherited structures, which I know are like incredibly colonial, and kind of work through them, but also that you're also dealing perhaps with audiences that are kind of expecting some stuff to happen. Like, where's that thing, or where's that third act thing that needs to happen? And, whatever hardwired things that are in our brains as audiences that have been conditioned with a certain kind of storytelling, shall we say, like, how do you bust through that, and how do you wrestle through that as theater makers? Vickie.
That's hard, because when I first wrote, I hadn't studied. I was just sort of, I'd always written short stories, and I'd done a poor imitation of acting with, and it was with the Chukalokoli Native Theater Ensemble, which was out of the American Indian Community House years and years and years ago. And it was Cochise Anderson, Steve Elm, Irene Bedard, Elisa Cato, Kim Snyder, James Shabinsky. We had all, and Steve was very devised theater. So I started with that. And I mean, I have to explain, like, my father always loved theater, and twice a year we would have to drive about 2.5 hours to go see theater, because where I grew up, there wasn't theater. There wasn't even maybe in my last year of high school, we had a teacher start a drama club. So it was all kind of an abstract for me. So when I started without any idea of structure, and just sort of, I'm telling a story. And as I worked, I learned the structures. I always like to throw in some sort of fourth wall breaking character. That's always been sort of one of my affectations. And everybody's like, it's so annoying. Why are you doing it? And I'm like, because he's the storyteller. Like, and I always had like that, got the traditional. So I've sort of, now I've gone so far in understanding third act, like I see plays, and it's difficult for me to sort of wrap my head around, there's no third act twist, or and it's like, wait a second, you used to not even look for that. You would go to Richard Foreman just because it was open, and I used to go to all that, Karen Finley, and it's like, shake it off. It's funny, but yeah, it's those colonial structures. It's not that I punch through. I think they punch through me. Let's put it that way. I am trying to embrace, like, I have some younger writers that I'm working with, and when I work with them, I'm just like, the focus is your voice. It is not about, don't worry about hitting these points on the script. Just find the character voice, find your voice. Tell me what you want to tell me about, and tell me give me a little fun entertainment. So that's how I'm punching through now, by trying to get the younger people more confident and ready to argue where I wouldn't.
Yeah, I hear you. I'll get to you, Drew, in a second. I just wanted to piggyback on that a little bit, Vickie, because I was speaking to early career playwright just 2 days ago, and they were kind of in the middle of their grad school training, and he said something really interesting that I've just been kind of like, my brain, I've just been kind of mulling over, which is, he said, oh, it was very similar, they said, oh, when I came to school, I just was writing, I was just kind of like exploring and like making things and telling stories and like being open to my dream life. And then, but I feel like I should be doing structure. They said I should be doing structure. And so I've written a play that's more like a play. And I was like, oh no. I'm so sad. But it was fascinating because they were not rejecting this other part of their writing voice, but they were diminishing it. They were saying, oh, that's not a real thing that I should be invested in, because of course the market and all things that kind of contribute to us doubting ourselves is enforcing this other thing and is saying, you need to do that, right? And I think that I go back and forth on this because I say, well, yes, I think that it's good to have some tools in your back pocket, right? Like, so if somebody asks you just on like literally a business level, like to say, hey, playwright person, can you write a 3-act, blah, blah, blah? And you go, yes, I can. I have it in my back pocket. I can do that, right? But I think it also is not like the only way to go about things, right? And I think that's where things get a little bit muddy, especially I would say in the US, although it's changing, but slowly. And a lot of it has to do with the influence also of streaming, what people call streaming, which is also like TV, which is also like filmed work, which tends to, or has tended to historically, since the narrative days of early cinema, been founded on that kind of 3-act thing, right? But it's not necessarily true about the very, very beginnings of cinema, which was non-narrative, and actually really just about image and the association of images. Drew, how do you struggle with all of this? You're just out of school. You're like, I've heard all this. I'm tired of this story. Yeah.
Well, I think it's all true, but it's all so interesting and so dynamic. And so, there's so many different facets of all of these problems. I also didn't have any like real structural training when I first started writing, because like I said, I came in and I did my undergrad as an actor. So I was very inundated in that structure, which has a very particular structure as well. And when I started writing, I was working under the mentorship of this wonderful playwright, Philip Gatanda, who he's an amazing playwright at UC Berkeley, one of like the living legends in the Asian American theater community. And what he really taught me was he didn't teach really anything about structure, about like regular kind of classical American structure. He was just really focused on what story do you want to tell? What is the thing that you want to say? And so when I first started writing, I was kind of like almost mimicking like what I thought a play was. I wasn't really like, I was in the mindset of, oh, I think that this is what a play should be. And so I'm going to try to write towards this. And it never really got me fully to where I felt like I had my own voice in my work. And it wasn't until like I kind of just let go of all of the structural kind of like things, and I was able to just like really fully write, that I was able to find some semblance of what that kind of voice is. What does the voice even mean? And I think like one of the things that I've really learned, actually, which is interesting going through grad school, you would imagine that grad school would be so much even more structured. But one of the things that I learned that's helped me the most, which is going through a thesis in playwriting with Lucas Nath, who's also an amazing, and he's very structure heavy, but he's an amazing playwright. And the biggest thing that he kind of taught us is that every single play has its own structure. It has a shape. It has its own way of telling the story. And so you don't have to kind of like play to a structure. You don't have to, mold what your story is to a certain structure. If it's a 90-minute, 2-act or 1-act, no intermission play, it doesn't have to be that if the play doesn't want to be that. You have to figure out what the play wants and mold and go for that kind of a story, structure wise at least. And so thinking of structure in those terms has actually kind of redefined how I've kind of approached playwriting, because I'm not concerned anymore with is this structure hitting all of the marks that I think it needs to. It's more about, is this structure actually holding together a story that feels good to me?
Yeah, and it makes me think too about one of the conundrums we have in our business as playwrights anyway, is that, we send work out usually, or somebody does, an agent or a representative or a friend sends work out. And I think that I don't want to diss people who are doing reading, because bless them, they're getting paid peanuts. But what I will say is that I found, and I don't know how you find this as playwrights, but I found that there's a lack of attention, shall we say, to how to read a play that doesn't, quote, look like a play, unless it's by a writer that they already know, that they know how they operate. But I found that I would say a diminishing lack of attention, even in the last, I would say, 10 years, around how to really reckon with. So I'll give you an example, sort of like a play that comes in, we talked about, let's the language that's driving it, et cetera, and that let's say that play lands in an inbox, and people are like, what do you mean it's all language? But where are the stage directions? And why aren't you telling me what it looks like? And blah, 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 blah. And you're like, that's not, can you just read it? Like literally, you'll learn how it works by reading it. So I think that there's a kind of other thing that happens in our business, which has to do with how the work gets to people, how it's perceived, what kind of, quote, category, I hate categories, but for lack of a better term, category it's put into. And then sometimes the lack of attention that's paid, which I think is also confounded with, within a at least US society that has a short attention span. And this has nothing to do with social media, actually. It's actually to do with something that's very ingrained, I think, in a kind of settler colonialist mentality, right? That is sort of like, I tramp over it and I move on. I think that's actually very true of the US, and it's sort of, it gets doubled down in terms of the way people are being asked to regard art and contemplate art. So I wonder if any of this resonates with you, or you have thoughts, or just you want to jam on, Vickie or Drew, toss a coin, whoever wants to lead.
Drew, you this time.
I can lead this one for sure. Yeah, I think that there's certain kind of things where the theater also, in American theater specifically, wants to be commodified. It wants to treat the play, the art, as a commodity. And how can we sell this commodity? How can we market this commodity? It's all about, how is this marketable, rather than, is this necessarily great art? Which it doesn't apply to everything, but I think is kind of a broad strokes kind of lens of how American theater kind of works. And I will say that, even in grad school, it's kind of doing those same things. It's wanting you to do those same things, wanting you to hit those boxes, hit those marks. There's some people who will say, oh, you need to do this, this, and this within the first 10 pages, because those are the only 10 pages that people are going to read. So it's what you're speaking to. I mean, people aren't actually reading your full work unless, you are handed it by somebody you trust, or you already know them, or, there's certain kind of things. But if you pick up a script that you don't know, and it's not in, that format that a play should be, you're kind of going to just disregard it. Or at least that's what we're told, is that they're going to disregard it. So you need to do this, this, and this within the first 10 pages to make sure that they keep reading your play. So I think that just speaks to what you were just saying. Yeah.
I mean, I agree. There's really the problem is that they look at, plays, theater as like products. There is the approach that everything is a product, and it's like, what's the market segment? Who are the people who are going to respond to this? I know subscription-based theaters who are full of wonderful artists, really the top artists in their field, but they have to look at, the submissions, and then they can look at it from their own taste, but then they have to put that filter over, but will this speak to our subscriber base? And again, though, because it is such a rarefied crew that can afford that type of, subscription and theater, that's the problem is, how do you approach theater? Is theater for the elite? Is theater this polished piece of art form that is for people who can afford to appreciate it? I mean, museums have open days where you can go without paying. Um, dance is another one. Opera is another one. It's like they have this price point that is really like, whenever I think about, and Drew, I'm sure you feel the same way. It's like when I'm writing a play, and especially as I tend to think of my audience as the folks from Six sitting in the room watching it, I know for a fact that a large majority of them can't afford the prices if I ever did get on Broadway, which was never necessarily a goal, but let's
Right.
use Broadway or even off-Broadway house prices. Yeah,
Yep.
those folks can't afford to spend that money on that when they have things like diapers, rent, food that is going to take, So
Yep.
it's hard when you're working within a structure that because I love the U.S. in certain respects, and I don't in many others, because it clashes really with sort of our approach to the world. But it is this idea of how we approach art. Is art a commodity, or is art a necessity for a healthy, well-formed society? For people to get together, if you have more access to art, you have more access to empathy, you have more access to connection. I'm making speeches, but sorry, apologies at large to anybody listening. I get on my soapboxes, but that's the thing. It's like, and I think in different countries, there's other approaches. Like, they see art and theater as a necessary, healthy part of their society. It's a way of creating a national connection, and I just don't understand why. So again, it's like, burn it all down and let's start again.
Oh, I haven't. I know. I mean, I was just talking to an artist recently about this. They were doing a show in Latvia at the big national theater there, and they were talking about, the actors are, the ensemble is hired throughout for the whole year. They're doing shows in Rev. That there's a and that there's a great pride in the audience going, I'm going to see a play at the National Theater, and this is my culture. That there's a sort of like, of course I'm going, like, this is part of who we are, like, and that, it was packed, every night, and, but it was less about the numbers and more about like taking pride in that. Yes, we have a national theater. Yes, that's like a good thing to have, and we should celebrate our artists being paid, and we should celebrate, work happening. It also creates a different kind of freedom, I think, in terms of, you're not worried about the bottom line, right? You know that people will show up because they understand that it's part of the fabric of their lives, and therefore you're not like going, oh, can we get people there? I think it sort of obviates the question of the product, right, that you mentioned, right? Because it's like in a way, it's sort of the product, as it were, is a given. Of course we're going to do this because it's necessary, people will come. You know what I mean? You're not spending your entire time going, what I think is the back-ended approach that happens a great deal, not always, but in a lot of, especially as you described, Vickie, subscriber-based spaces, member-based spaces. I think this thing around members and all that stuff, right? The gatekeeping that happens, right? And so who can afford it and so on, where the discussion becomes not the art work, but everything around it, right? So brief anecdote. I was at a regional theater many years ago in residence, which I learned a lot about all of this. But it was fascinating because there were season planning, and I rarely did I hear people say, "Oh my gosh, I love this play," or I can't wait for us to do it. It was more like, okay, how can we pitch it and sell it to our subscribers? And then we need to figure out what the issue of the play is if it's not apparent, so that we can have panels afterwards, because that's actually what's going to help people come. And I was like, can you just talk about the art piece that you're supposedly wanting to produce? And it felt to me so backwards in a sense, because in a way, this goes back to my thinking about like when people talk about new sound in music or something, where it's like, instead of being in a loop of like recycled sound, let's think about like, what's that new sound, and how to get people excited about not the newness for newness sake, because I think that can get tiresome as well, but I think more like, how do we listen differently? Oh, this is making me see something differently. Oh, isn't that awesome? Like, wow, let's follow this artist's path. So I just think that this has to do more with trusting what the artwork is, but also the vision behind the art. So I think that this gets me back to the question of being the artist, right? So that the artist that's making, that's creating, that's sort of visioning the work and dreaming about it, in a sense, it's not just about one artwork, but it's about a body of work. It's about the trajectory of what you make, how one piece feeds into the next one. So I'd love for you to if you wish or can or are able to talk about like how you conceive of the body of your work. How do you conceive of how the pieces bleed into each other, inform each other, sometimes talk against each other, back to each other, as I think that does happen in playwriting. We write something and then we write something that's like, no, why did you write that? I'm going to write this. Like there's this funny war that sometimes happens inside of us as writers, where we kind of are like not at war with ourselves, but kind of contesting each other from play to play. Perhaps I think that sometimes happens in the process. But yeah, like how do you conceive of the body of your work, and because there is a larger story that's happening in terms of story, right? The larger story is who you are as an artist, and how these different pieces, almost like you were going to a museum and you see a retrospective of Jasper Johns or wherever, where you suddenly see like, oh, wow, this piece and this piece and this piece, right? And I think that playwrights are the same thing. So I wonder if you have thoughts around all of this and what to articulate some of this.
Drew, you take first and I'll go. Look at this one.
Yes. I think I constantly kind of keep changing how I view the body of my work. And I think that just comes from like constantly changing how I view playwriting itself and how I view the art form of theater making. And I will say that there is one kind of like, I think, concise way of like saying that, which is that the last time that Vickie and I talked about kind of our theater making process and everything like that was at the public, and we gave a little talk about that kind of thing. And I remember I was talking about my work. This was a few years ago now. This was a couple of years ago, and I was talking about my work in terms of being angry and being an angry playwright, and that's where that kind of fuel was coming from, was being angry at the world around me. And I remember something that Vickie said, like, it just has always kind of stuck with me and has never really left me, and I think has really kind of like changed a little bit of how I view my art making, which is that Vickie said then afterwards, like it was right after me, she said, I'm also angry and I'm also empathetic. And I combine both of those things in my play, which I think is very true to Vickie as a playwright, is the empathy part of that. And so I at this point, I view all of my work as kind of a relentless kind of pursuit of trying to figure something out, and being really curious about something, and being really empathetic about people that do things that I don't understand why they do, but they do them because they're in the play and because they do the things in the play. And so being really empathetic towards those things, even if me, the native person, is very angry about it. So being really curious and empathetic and still a little bit angry, as I think what kind of combines all of my work.
Excellent. That's very funny. I love that. It's weird because I tend to write like just sort of, I get a grain in my head and I start writing and I vent and I throw it out and then I go back and rewrite. But as I get older, I realize, no, there is, I would have told you a few years ago, I have no thing. I just go with the moment. I go with the stimulus, but that's not true. I have always, took me ages to figure it out, but I have always had this question of duality, and it's just the duality of being an Indigenous person in the modern world, the duality of being like I'm mixed blood. I'm a half Jamaican Tuscarora, which visually does not necessarily the first thing that crosses people's minds, but it's always fun when that information comes out. But it's that idea of the push and pull of how do you maintain your integrity to with your values when the outside world is sort of pulling at you in different ways and you're being told to fit in these different ways or play the game in these different ways, sort of that forever code switching type of conversation. And I think that's where my writing is lives, in that sort of, well, okay, is this selling out my culture, or is this helping them? Or is this a good fight for my people, or is this me grandstanding? When I made these actions, did I do something to, like, Glenburn, a woman kills a man who she thinks murdered her best friend from the reservation. And it's like, okay, maybe in her heart of hearts, she felt she was justified. But does that make it right? That doesn't make it right culturally for us, you know? And so it's just that sort of push and pull, that kind of duality. That's where my work, I've finally discovered, lives. And it always seems to end up with that sort of balancing between the two questions.
Amazing. And that was so beautiful, Drew, that Vickie's comment stayed with you after all that time. That's so touching and so lovely.
Yeah, I made a squee face for the folks listening. I made oh, really?
Me? What did I say back then that stayed with you? You never know. When you say something and it stays with somebody, right? That's the beauty of what we do. True with plays, you never know how it's going to hit an audience, how it's going to affect our fellow collaborators, even. We're almost at time, but I try to at least occasionally end with questions around dreaming and dreams for the field, whether it be personal dreams that you have, but also wider ones for this industry that, as you said quite rightly, Vickie, is in free fall and crumbling, and trying to figure out what it is, what is it doing, and how is it, mean anything, so, and we all understand economic precarity, like that is understood, but I think to a larger question, I think it's also about kind of ethical and dilemma around what are we making, who is it for, and why are we, as an industry, at least at large, allowing $500 seats, $350 seats, $1,000. You know what I mean? Like, the more this gets normalized, right? Of course we do that. I'm like, wait, hold on, what? Stop. Like, who are you pricing out, and like, why are you doing that? And it does become. I just remember a colleague of mine said, then do it in a rich person's mansion somewhere. Like, do the play there. Like, in a way, like what they were saying was like, just do it there, and like, don't invite anyone else. Like, you know what I mean? Like who is it really for, right? But yeah, what dreams beyond economic ones, art subsidy? What dreams do you have for the field, and that you wish to put into the air?
Would you like to go?
You,
Toss a coin. Yeah.
all right. For me, my dreams for the field is for people to realize how very necessary theater is as an art form, especially in a world where we have siloed ourselves so much. The telephones constantly. I've seen people sitting at a table texting all around, and I don't know if they're texting each other or not, but I'm like, it's such a old chestnut now to say, look up at the person at the table with you. Well, I feel like theater could, if we can normalize it, find a way to really weave it into the structure of society, it will help people connect.
Mm-hmm.
It will help people get a comfort level with other people right now, because I've noticed, like, especially after the pandemic, that we are less comfortable speaking to each other one-on-one. We are less comfortable in groups. We are less comfortable in a social setting where we have to be around each other, even though at the same time, we're all like, oh my gosh, it's so great to be in a group. Awkward silence, awkward silence, awkward silence. So I feel like theater is really necessary for repairing that. And my hopes and dreams are that we normalize it and get it very fluid, very, very capable of packing up head and, being on stage with a fabulous, elaborate production. If we have them funding for that, and great, that's fun. Let's explore and have the set designers and lighting designers do amazing things, because that is art as well. Beautiful art structures. But then also take it on the road and have it go to the res and go to a community center here. I'm just thinking of the community center here, and have folks get up there, have everybody come in with their snacks and the kids and sit down and watch in what we have there, and having that normalized as well, that it's okay to be, and stop looking at it as a status symbol. Like, I see some of these, some of the stunt casting and some of the really fabulous, interesting productions that they pull over from the UK, where it's more community based than it is here, and then charging $700 or whatever. I'm like, no, people, no, that's not for the people. But anyway, that's me rambling. Book love.
I'll just add on to all of that. I think that that's all what I hope for the future as well is really what Vickie was saying is repairing this kind of connection based community, and especially in New York. You see how theater is such a big thing in New York, but the prices, and it's pricing people out, and if it was really accessible, it could do so much good for American social networks, and for how we communicate with each other, and how we talk about issues, and how we talk about different subjects, because theater makes it so clear that these issues and these things, they're not, there's so many different facets of everything that we can talk about. And that's the beauty of theater, I think. And that's why I continue to, try to be a practitioner of theater, is because it's pertinent. It's right in your face. It's you can't escape it. You can't, be on your phone in the middle of a dark theater while people are on stage or looking at you. You are forced to interact with it. And then that forced interaction then hopefully will engage you to talk about it afterwards and talk about the subject, talk about the theater, talk about the acting, all of those things. So my hope and dream is that, that becomes more normalized, that becomes more, obviously more affordable, but definitely more of a normalized cultural thing to go to theater. And then also too, this has kind of always been my dream since I was a kid, is, native theater being really prominent and being able to be, Vickie, being able to be on Broadway and then also going on a tour and doing it on the Reds, having both of these things, not just being, forced to settle because it's not profitable or whatever, or it's not marketable, or they can't find enough native actors, all of these kind of things that people always say. I kind of, my hope for the future is that we can have both of these things and not just have to settle for what we are given.
That's an incredible way to wrap this. Nothing to add other than thank you so much for making time. And it's so beautiful to chat with both of you. I want to encourage our audience to seek, whoever you are out there, to seek Drew and Vickie's respective theater pieces wherever they live, in print, online, in the air, on stages. It all matters. It all matters. And maybe widen the circle of artists that you know. Also, I will say, if you're following Conversations from the Alcove, then you know that I always end the episodes with a little wave goodbye, but then I stay offline with my artists to do another kind of like goodbye away after the recording is over. So for now, thanks for watching or listening, however you're experiencing this, Conversations from the Alcove. Thank you to Vickie and Drew, and I'll catch you on the next time. Bye.